Then he also writes, the mental image of Trump hiding from Iran in a catering cart is devastating. A weak, stupid old man hiding from the consequences of his own decision while endangering others.
Well, true. However, this was a national security situation of his own making, to Tommy's point.
Donald Trump was reportedly moved in secret from his aircraft because of a serious Iranian assassination threat. And now this CNN panel is debating whether that was simply a necessary security precaution or a consequence of Trump's own decisions. The discussion gets into the controversial Qatari jet, the strength of Iran after the war, America's depleted military stockpiles, and whether Trump has created a conflict that is becoming increasingly difficult to escape. Now, if you're new here, I'm Bradley Hostin, and this is The Bradley Hostin Show. If you enjoy honest political commentary, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. As usual, let's watch the clip, and then I'll give you guys my thoughts afterwards.
There are really two issues here. Number one, which is, I think at this point a little bit on the back burner, is the whole Qatari jet, Air Force One, which was given to the United States. That was shipped out like the night before, and the president claimed, it turns out quite dishonestly, that plane was going to visit troops, U.S. troops in Germany and whatnot who wanted to see it. That appears to have not been true, doubly now. So now you have this elaborate plan to hide him on this other plane. And I just want to read you a couple tweets from Tommy Vietor, who worked in the Obama administration in the National Security Council. He wrote, quote, "This makes Trump look like both a liar and a scared little bee," rhymes with witch. Then he also writes, the mental image of Trump hiding from Iran in a catering cart is devastating. A weak, stupid old man hiding from the consequences of his own decision while endangering others.
Well, true. However, this was a national security situation of his own making, to Tommy's point. None of this rigmarole would have happened if Trump had just stayed on the real Air Force One that is completely outfitted with all of the bells and whistles and protection measures and defense measures that were necessary to protect the president of the United States. But no, he had to have his new toy. He had to have his Qatari bride plane. And against the
Iranians would have still tried to kill President Trump if he was on the original Air Force One.
So the Iranians have been trying to kill lots of presidents and people for years. There's
that doesn't make it okay.
Let's hear it go.
No. Okay. So here, you know what? To your point, since you're so eager to make this point, then why the hell did Donald Trump put his life in danger by going on a Qatari plane that wasn't outfitted with the proper things to defend him in the first place, to protect him? So that sounds asinine, your logic. So if he had just done this and not used taxpayer money to waste taxpayer money to have his little new plane and show it off, make a big deal about it when it wasn't secure, none of this ever would have happened. It's a situation of his own making.
Jesse?
Yeah, I think the point stands that the Iranians would have tried to kill President Trump and are trying to kill President Trump, despite everything that Tara just said. I don't even necessarily disagree with you about the Qatari plane, but it's totally divorced from the fact that the problem here is the Iranians trying to kill our president, yours and mine, whether we like it or not.
No,
let's not forget that the bad guys are the terrorists trying to kill the president in this equation.
Yes, which we would benefit from actually calling that out, right? I mean, this idea that there are two separate stories here, the news story, the transactional stuff that occurred, but the underlying threat from the Iranian government. This was not the first time that the Iranians tried to kill the president. Back in March, there was an individual who was caught and prosecuted over the same thing, being pushed through by the IRGC. One might argue, and I think that our friends on the left would argue this, that if it was a Democratic president, you would say this is an act of war.
Go ahead.
I will say, as somebody who is a staffer that traveled with Biden on Air Force One, I'm okay with the security protocols because Secret Service would not do something like this unless it was very, very credible. But what was going to be the plan with the real life staffers and the media that were on the plane as a decoy? That to me feels like another piece of this that's a bit left out. But look, Republican president, Democratic president, it doesn't matter. I don't want to see our president killed by a foreign nation.
I think the answer is collateral damage, right? If the idea is to use it as a decoy, there's only one thing that happens to the decoy, right?
But the point.
Let me add one point to this, because Jason said there are two parts to this story. There are at least three, which is that The reason we're all sitting here discussing this is because of fantastic reporting from the Washington Post, then recently seconded by the New York Times, in the context of the Trump administration subpoenaing previously journalists from the New York Times who had reported on the Qatari jet. So the fact that we all know this now, it's a bizarre story. It doesn't particularly inspire me with confidence that the President of the United States is hiding in a catering truck. But I do think it's worth paying tribute to our journalistic colleagues who have actually brought this out.
I am always willing to give credit to the journalists there. Let me add a fourth aspect to this story. This doesn't seem like a particularly weak Islamic Republic of Iran right now if the president is forced to hide in a catering truck by this country he's been at war with, for months, right?
He wasn't cowering in a catering truck.
Well, you couldn't see him.
He wasn't. I mean, he was using that as a vehicle to get to another plane for security purposes, most likely, as you point out, because Secret Service said, this is the way we need to handle this. So it seems odd to frame it in that way. And the Tommy Vietor texts, the tweets, are absolute lunacy. I mean, that is a ridiculous way to frame a security protocol to protect the United States of America, almost as if they're goading him to go into situations in which there's another assassination attempt on his life. Okay. I don't know what the practical matter is of that, other than to try to shame him for not being the subject of an Iranian plot to murder him?
You're ignoring why the Secret Service had to make that change, why that he was put in that position, is because he did not take Air Force One, the original Air Force One that is completely...
That's not true. But that's not true. That is factually inaccurate.
So we're
the
saying
folks that we were talking about, just one point.
Okay.
The folks that we're talking about, the so-called decoys, were on the old Air Force One. Right. So they were there. So despite the fact that has the top-of-the-line security...
Before all of that, it was before all of that, he flew to Turkey.
They didn't target that plane.
No, you didn't the Qatari airplane, and he could not fly from back home from Turkey because that plane was not properly outfitted.
That is not accurate. I will say this.
He did not listen to national security folks about that.
He certainly could not fly in the Qatari jet.
Right.
That's true. But they also determined he couldn't fly on the 747 that had been serving as Air Force One for some time. So they had to go to option C there. And Niall, just to my point, if we can just address this for 1 second. If not, you take out the cowering and a catering truck for Tommy Vietor, this is still the Iranians dictating actions by the President of the United States.
100%. And also to the other point that you made, actions that the old Air Force One, the traditional Air Force One, was not formidable enough for them to feel safe traveling in. This, with all due respect to Tara, isn't really about the Qatari jet. It's about the fact that the dangers were apparently so acute that there was no plane that he could safely travel on and be known to be traveling on it. They took him off, or they decided against using the traditional Air Force One because he was under such threat from this nation that he sort of demeans as a minnow that has been overwhelmed by American military firepower.
Can we just rewind a hot sec? You said this is evidence that the Iranians are somehow stronger or more emboldened than we...
I didn't say than us. I just said...
Than we anticipate.
And an emboldened Iran.
Sure. I disagree. I think that this is a regime that doesn't even have a supreme leader, okay, at this point. He's missing in action. We have no idea where this guy is. It's a weekend at Bernie's, weekend at Mojtabaz situation over there in Tehran at this point.
So why is Trump hiding in a catering truck then?
Trump is hiding in a catering truck because we have an excess of security protocols that we go through our Secret Service.
So you think the Secret Service threw him in there just for the fun of it? I mean, they threw him in there because he's in danger, and he's in danger from Iranian attack.
Absolutely. The Iranians are trying to kill our president. We're all in danger because of the Iranian terror regime. You too, even though you're Irish.
Jason, we were here last night processing this news as it all came in. It sort of had a day to settle in. Any new thoughts here, A, about the Iranian threat, or B, again, about this lingering question of leaving so many people on a plane not deemed safe enough for the president?
Okay, but that's separate from, there's been some language that I heard today talking about an imminent threat, which is not bared out by the reporting. It was a serious threat that they obviously believed could have resulted in an attack, or what seems more likely, given who was actually on the plane, that they just didn't want to risk anything, that the timeline of when we learned what information was coming in and what was done with that information matters. The reason why I push back a little bit on the imminent threat part is If it was an imminent threat, they would not have had him publicly walk up the stairwell to Air Force One and do any of that. They just would not have done that. We're also making assumptions that people on the plane didn't know. My guess is Marco Rubio probably did know.
Well, 100% the reporters didn't know. I'm not making any assumption there.
No, I don't know if that's true.
I do.
Because Susan Page today came out, right, and said that she held on to that for 25...
That's a long time ago.
But that's my point, is that she held on to that information and didn't reveal it. She apparently was the only one who knew about that. We don't know if everyone on that plane, one person might have been told, similar to what happened with Bill Clinton, and just choosing to abide by the promise not to release that information, which Susan Page did for 25 years.
I just want to zoom out for a second. We've been told repeatedly that Iran's military was destroyed entirely. Their missile capacity and their ability to pose any threat has been destroyed. That's very clearly not true.
Well, this is a surface-to-air missile that's held by one person.
Well, it's kind of
that's a huge difference than talking about the military of Iran.
Has made all of us less safe, and this is one of those rare instances where Donald Trump is now experiencing the consequences of his actions. He can spike prices and be insulated. He can cut healthcare and be insulated. But this Iran war is making us all less safe, and it was under the guise of making America more safe. They are currently holding the Strait of Hormuz hostage, the entire oil flow hostage, while Trump has no way out of this. This
There's
is
been
an
an
endless
Iranian
war.
threat specifically against Trump for a very long time.
But now the American people are suffering.
I would say two things can be true at the same time. Operation Epic Fury was an incredible tactical success, and it doesn't get enough credit for what those planes were able to achieve. It did severely degrade their nuclear facilities to an immense degree, and we also degraded a lot of their other armaments. There is some remaining. I'm not disputing that. And I do think, it only takes one maniac in the regime to launch this sort of thing and to attempt to assassinate the president. And I think what that shows is the perils of early on the communication of were we going for regime change or weren't we?
It's the perils of...
Camille, I've been seeing your face, and you were like agreeing and disagreeing with everyone who was speaking sort of simultaneously. So I'm just trying to decode what the face was.
No, this is my proclivity. I don't have a particular team, so I just try to see what makes sense and go with that. No, look, I'm inclined to agree that the real story here isn't so much the security concerns and precautions that were taken. Seems eminently reasonable to me for Secret Service to make the decision that they made. It also seems reasonable to me for the people who travel in the press corps with the President of the United States on Air Force One in the Middle East to understand that there is a degree of risk that you accept when you travel in the motorcade, as I've had in the past. So that, I think, just stands there. But the thing that we ought to be talking about is the conflict that the United States of America entered into voluntarily that has, in fact, increased the level of risk associated with the presidency, but for the country as a whole. We've seen cyber attacks on our infrastructure here in the United States to a degree that we had not before. We know that our military arsenal has been depleted severely in ways that all of our adversaries are looking at and kind of smacking their lips, wondering how can we further exacerbate these problems for the United States of America. All of this is downstream from an imprudent decision that the President of the United States made, however successful the kind of tactical decisions were. Broadly, with respect to the campaign, he knew that the munitions were limited, that they were in short supply, and chose, again, voluntarily, without anything suggesting we needed to do it right then, that this was the course of action he was going to take. And it seems like a bad call in retrospect.
All of that and bad politics. In particular,
Yes.
Trump was able to win young men, young voters in 2024 because he said no more foreign wars, no new foreign wars. And they believed him. To break a promise to voters that you may have won once, but you did not win forever is so damaging to the long-term credibility of the Republican Party in a way that I don't know how you come back from.
So there are honestly several things that stood out to me in that discussion, but the biggest one is this. Two things can be true at the same time. Yes, if the Secret Service determines that the president is facing a serious threat, they absolutely should take whatever precautions are necessary to protect him. I don't care whether that president is Donald Trump, Joe Biden, Barack Obama, or anyone else, but that doesn't mean we can't question the decisions that created the circumstances surrounding that threat. And that's where I think some of the arguments in this panel completely miss the point. The Iranian threat didn't just appear out of nowhere. The United States voluntarily entered this conflict, and now we're seeing consequences that go far beyond the battlefield. We're talking about threats to the president, attacks and cyber threats, depleted military stockpiles, disruption around the Strait of Hormuz, and an Iran that, despite everything we've been told, clearly still has the ability to pose a threat. And that's why I found the argument about the original Air Force One so interesting. If the traditional presidential aircraft wasn't considered safe enough for the president to travel on because of the threat from Iran, then that tells you something about the seriousness of the situation. And it also makes the controversy surrounding the Qatari aircraft even more important. Because if you're going to introduce a foreign-donated aircraft into the conversation surrounding presidential security, then the American people have every right to ask questions about whether that aircraft was actually appropriate for presidential travel in the first place. But here's where I think the MAGA defense gets it wrong. Nobody is saying the Iranian government is innocent. Nobody is saying attempting to assassinate an American president is acceptable. Of course, Iran is responsible for its own actions. The question is whether Donald Trump made a decision that increased America's exposure to those dangers unnecessarily. And that's a completely legitimate question. What also really stood out to me was the argument that we were told Iran's military capabilities had essentially been destroyed. Because if that's the case, how are we now in a situation where Iran can still threaten the president, still pose a military threat, still create problems around the Strait of Hormuz, and still force the United States to take extraordinary security precautions? At some point, the American people deserve a little more than slogans about victory. Tell us what the objectives were. Tell us what was destroyed. Tell us what remains. And most importantly, tell us what the end game is. Because that's the part that concerns me the most. Donald Trump campaigned in large part on the promise of avoiding new foreign wars. A lot of voters, particularly younger voters, believed him. So when you take the country into another major conflict, you can't simply pretend that the political consequences don't exist. And that's ultimately what I think this entire discussion exposes. You can argue that the military operation was tactically successful. You can argue that Iran's capabilities were significantly degraded. But if the broader consequence is that America is now spending enormous amounts of money burning through critical military stockpiles, facing greater security threats, and has no clear path toward ending the conflict, then we have to ask whether the strategic decision was actually successful. Because winning a battle and winning a war are two completely different things. And right now, I'm not convinced that the administration has adequately explained what victory actually looks like. Let me know your guys' thoughts down in the comments section below. Do you think these extraordinary security measures were simply necessary because of the Iranian threat? Or do you believe Trump created a situation that has made America less safe? As usual, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more news commentaries. I'll see you guys in the next one.